My name is Dr. Tabitha Grossman. I'm a senior policy analyst at the National Governors Association, and I'm very pleased and honored to chair this panel today. First and foremost, because we're all women on this panel, which is exciting. Yeah. We've heard from a lot of men this morning, so now it's time to hear from the ladies. I just wanted to tell you briefly about my involvement with the ladies on the panel. As I said, I work at the National Governors Association. We are the nation's only consulting firm dedicated to the needs and interests of our nation's governors. We are located in Washington, D.C., and 2 years ago, we got funding from the Joyce Foundation, the Kauffman Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, and the Gates Foundation to start a project around teacher compensation that would be designed for states and provide them with technical assistance to help them redesign new models of teacher compensation. And we released an RFP that was open to all 50 states and territories. We received applications from a number of them, and then an independent selection committee selected 6 states to participate in what we call Policy Academy. The 6 states are Louisiana, Florida, Tennessee, Rhode Island, Kansas, and Indiana, and they are wrapping up this 24-month project. And so I was very pleased when Matthew Springer asked if I'd be willing to chair a panel that will host 2 of the states that have participated in this process, both Tennessee and Louisiana, to talk about what this has been like, what the process of looking at teacher compensation from a state perspective has been. We've talked a lot about what districts are doing, and this panel, with the exception of Shayne, and I'll explain that in just a second, we'll be talking about the state perspective of doing this very important work. Let me just set the context just briefly by starting out by saying money does matter to teachers. And it's foolish to think that it doesn't. There's actually research that substantiates this claim. Dan Goldhaber and some of his colleagues did a study where they asked teachers to choose which of the following 3 things they'd rather have: 3 fewer students, a part-time teacher assistant, or $5,000 extra dollars. And overwhelmingly, teachers chose the extra money. Oddly, all 3 of these things are valued at $5,000, yet teachers still chose the money. I think Jason mentioned earlier that this is not charity work, and I think that is a huge question brewing. Some people think it's not charity work. Some people think that in a way it's a public service to be a teacher. In fact, a Time magazine article this week asked that very question. Is teaching a profession, or is it a public service that we owe to our communities? And I think settling that question is challenging, and I think the answers will vary from place to place. But what is most important are the strategies we use to attract and retain very high-performing people to be teachers in our schools. We are joined today by 3 distinguished people who've worked in this space at the state level, and Shayne at the district level, and so I'll introduce her first. Shayne Spalten is works in Denver, and she's part of the QComp program there, the ProComp, program there, and she's the Chief Human Resources Officer, and she's going to be talking with us about what Denver has done over the past several years and how it intersects with some of the important work that the state has taken on. Jeanne Burns is with the Board of Regents in the state of Louisiana, and Jeanne does a lot of things in that state. In fact, she frequently reminds me that her primary job is that of a professor and that she's been on loan to the board for over 10 years. But Jeanne has led the leadership team that the National Governors Association has supported over the past 20 months. She leads the leadership team there, and they've done some remarkable things in this space, and she'll talk about that. And last but not least is Erin O'Hara, and she's with the governor's office here in Tennessee. And she, along with some of her other colleagues, have worked in this important space. And Erin is now leading Tennessee's state leadership team that we sponsor with the National Governors Association. I'll bring Jeanne to the stage first to talk about the important work that Louisiana is doing. What we'll do is we'll follow a similar format to the other panels this morning. Everyone will present, and then we'll open up for questions.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate the opportunity to talk about the work we've been doing in Louisiana with not only the value-added work that we're doing, but also the direction we're going with teacher compensation. This morning, I really appreciated what Drew said when he talked about the fact that we're really in an age of experimentation as we're looking at teacher effectiveness. I also appreciated what Jason said, and I've adapted it a little bit, where he talked about what you need to be doing is planning, piloting, learning, and adapting. Because I feel that within our state, that's exactly what has been occurring. And we're still to the point where we're developing an understanding of what teacher effectiveness really means. What I'm going to do today is I'm not going to try to use the clicker for the screen. Instead, I'm going to tell the control booth up there to go to the next slide, and I'm going to do that all the way through. So if you'll please go to the first slide. What I'm going to do first is just give you a little bit of background information pertaining to where we are currently and the work that we've done within our state before I go in and talk about our framework for a teacher compensation model. Within our state, we started back in 1999-2000 with a Blue Ribbon Commission for Teacher Quality that was given a charge of identifying recommendations to more effectively prepare, support, retain, recruit effective teachers and principals. With that commission, during the first year, it developed 60 recommendations for how we needed to change our state certification structure so that we would have higher quality teachers be completing our teacher preparation programs. And then the second year, it spent its time talking about a teacher accountability system for teacher preparation programs, and also about what we needed to do to prepare more effective principals. With the discussion about the teacher preparation accountability system, they identified multiple measures that we needed to use to look at the quality of the teacher preparation programs, and one of those measures pertained to a value-added model that would look at growth in student learning. We did not have the capacity at that point in time to be able to link the teachers, to the students, to the tests that the students took. And that was critical in order to have a value-added model be implemented. It was not until 2003, 2004 that our state had the capacity to do that. What happened within our state is we had a person by the name of Dr. George Knoll from LSU who was working with us as we were evaluating redesigned teacher preparation programs, and we provided him with some funding to help develop a value-added model for teacher preparation programs. George spent 2 years piloting the model, and we were going through that process of piloting, learning, adapting, planning, piloting, learning, adapting. And it was not until 2005, 2006 that we were able to pilot the model using all teachers, all students in all school districts within our state, and looking at all of our university teacher preparation programs. It was not until 2006, 2007 that we actually started to make public the results for our value-added model for our teacher preparation programs. Now, with our value-added model, we look at grades 4 through 9. We look at the content areas of math, science, social studies, reading, and language arts. We look at our alternate certification programs as well as our undergraduate teacher preparation programs. And again, we do this with all of our public and our private universities within the state, and these are redesigned programs. We are able to predict growth of learning based upon prior achievement and demographic variables. We look at each individual child when we predict the growth of learning. We look at the actual amount of growth that they make within a 1-year time period. We link that to the teacher. And then we link all of the new teachers to the teacher preparation program that prepared the teachers. And then we look at the overall effect estimate for the teacher preparation program, and we can then compare that to the average effect estimate of experienced teachers and determine whether the teacher preparation programs are preparing new teachers where the growth in student learning is greater than that of experienced teachers, if it's comparable to experienced teachers, if it's comparable to new teachers, if it's below new teachers, or if it's significantly below new teachers. And again, we are now making those results available to the public. So within our state, we started off with a value-added model for teacher preparation. Our teacher unions were very aware of the work that we were doing, and they did not express concerns about it because the intent here was to turn out new teachers who were more effective than the teachers that were being turned out previously from our teacher preparation programs. However, for this model, we were not looking just at new teachers. We were also looking at practicing teachers. So our current state superintendent in 2009-2010 was able to make arrangements for Dr. Knoll to be on loan to work for the Louisiana Department of Education to develop a value-added model using what he had learned from the teacher preparation process to look at practicing teachers within our state. So we're to the point now where last year he piloted the model with specific schools. This year, he's piloting the model with districts. There's about 20 districts that have been identified. And then next year, we will be going with using the model with all teachers across our state for our new teachers as well as our practicing teachers. So as you can see, the development of our value-added model has been an outgrowth of the work that we did with the teacher preparation model. Within our state, we have also piloted the TAP program to take a look at teacher compensation. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more later on, but we're to the point right now where we have 54 schools in our state that are implementing the TAP model, and this is a model where value-added data is used. Awards are given to teachers and to schools. And it also has other elements of it that provides career opportunities for teachers as well as professional development. And we're to the point where, again, this year we have 54 schools that are implementing the TAP model, and we have 65 schools that are at what we call a pre-TAP stage, where they are determining if they want to implement the TAP model in the future. And if you could please change the slide. Within our state, we have also passed new legislation this June 2010. One is what's called our value-added bill. This is Act 54. We will now have in place within our state a new teacher and principal evaluation system. 50% of the weight will be the use of value-added results. We will be evaluating teachers on an annual basis. This is new within our state. And an Educator Evaluation Advisory Committee is part of this legislation. 50% of the committee is made up of teachers. And it starts meeting as of Friday of this week to develop the details that are going to have to be in place in order to implement this new act. We will be piloting the new evaluation system for 2 years, and then it will go into full implementation in 2012-2013. We also had a new bill that was passed. It's called the Red Tape Reduction Act, and this bill is going to be able to provide waivers to local school districts from state laws and from state regulations if they're provided approval from our Board of Elementary and Secondary Education to support the work that they'll be doing within their districts to improve the quality of teachers and programs and schools within their individual districts. If you'll please go to the next slide. Now, for the work that we're doing with our teacher compensation model, as a result of the grant from the National Governors Association, we ended up using our Blue Ribbon Commission. It is still in operation. It changes out every other year with off years with new members on the commission. The commission is made up of 1/3 district personnel, teachers of the year, principals of the year, superintendents. 1/3 is made up of university leaders. We've got College of Ed deans, faculty, presidents, provosts. Then 1/3 is made up of business leaders, state leaders, and parents. It's a 36-member commission. This past year, and then I might add that this past year, we also added all of our teacher unions to the commission so that they would be involved in the discussions that we had pertaining to a model that we could use within our state to take a look at teacher compensation. With this particular commission, the process we used was one where we brought in individuals from other states who were already implementing teacher compensation models. In addition, we brought in other experts to talk to our commission members. We brought in people from our state who were implementing the TAP model. And the process we use with all of our commission meetings is that morning is spent gathering new information, and then the afternoon is spent having the commission start to address some very specific issues dealing with whatever the charge of the commission is for that particular year. And this past year, it was to develop a teacher compensation model. At the end of the year, what happens is we develop a set of recommendations, and then they are made to a joint meeting of our Board of Elementary and Secondary Education and our Board of Regents. And then every year, those two boards have adopted those particular recommendations. And that's the process we use this year. You will find on the screen where the commission decided that it was going to develop a comprehensive teacher compensation framework instead of one model. They felt that it was very important that the message be sent out to all of our school districts that this is not just pay for performance in isolation, that if you're really going to improve the quality of teaching within schools, then you need to look at it as being a comprehensive system. I'm not going to go through and read the 7 different key elements that are a part of the system that they recommended, because you can read it, but you can clearly see that it is very important here that teachers have multiple career paths, that they have professional development, value added as part of this, the awards, that's part of the entire process. But our commission felt that without professional development, without support, that it would not be enough just to have the value-added results, that the teachers needed to have the support to use those results and do something with them to improve what was happening within their schools, and then that in turn will lead toward the compensation. If you'll go to the next slide. What we called a question and answer document, response document. And we put this document up on the website to support the framework. What this document does is it very clearly identifies specific questions that the commission felt that school districts needed to have answered, knowing what the perspective was coming from the state. And in addition to the questions, a possible response, and then some examples for where the districts could go in order to get more specific information about how they would actually go about doing whatever was recorded as part of the response. And this particular document was looked at as an opportunity to be able to continue to change the examples over time and to be able to provide districts with ongoing information in the future pertaining to teacher compensation models. Now, if you go online and you take a look at the information that we have, you will find that the examples primarily deal with the TAP model, because at this particular point in time, the Commission felt that this was one place where we had some very specific information pertaining to implementation, but we will be adding to that within the future. Now, the example that I gave you here was also an example where we had a lot of discussion about at our Blue Ribbon Commission meeting, and it pertained to funding, because within our state, we do not have race to the top funds. And when we had the discussions with the Commission, we talked about the fact that because of budget cuts in the state, if we do not have new funding coming from the state, what do we need to do in order to be able to actually implement and do this? And so one of our members who worked with the Commission from the Department of Ed looked at various funding sources that are available within our state to support the framework that we identified, and created a document that identifies all of the different funding sources that the local school districts could use. So as I said, we looked at this as not something where we have to have new funds, but a way in which we could better make use of existing funds in the event that we did not get race to the top. Next slide. Our next step is this. It is going to be very important within our state to be able to communicate information to teachers, to principals, to superintendents, to parents about our new Act 54, because it's going to be important for us to be able to help to separate out what's going to be occurring as part of the evaluation system using value added as compared to what's going to be happening with the compensation system that we're going to have within the state. So our focus during this next year is going to be to communicate information to the public so that everyone has a common understanding of our Act 54 and of the teacher and the principal evaluation system that will be implemented within the future. During this next year, we're also going to be communicating information about TAP. We already have in place procedures in order to go about doing that. And then next year, we're going to start working on implementing communication procedures pertaining to the framework itself. So the process that we've used within our state is not a process that other states have likely used. However, I'm hoping that what we've learned through this process, we can share with your states. As I said, with everything we've done with our Blue Ribbon Commission, we've brought in people from other states, not to do what they've done, but to learn from what they have learned that has worked or what has not worked. And that has saved us a tremendous amount of time. If you could please go to the last slide. I guess that was the last slide. All right, again, in the PowerPoint that's in your packet, I have provided you with some URLs in the event that you want to go and get copies of any of the materials that have been produced thus far. We have even more that we can share with you. We'll be very happy to share information pertaining to our value-added model with other states, and with what we've done with the development of our comprehensive teacher compensation framework, we'll be glad to share additional information pertaining to that as well. Thank you.
As I was looking last night at Jeanne's slides, I think and part of the reason that the panel was structured this way is that Louisiana's been doing this work for a little longer than Tennessee, and certainly in a different sort of more comprehensive manner. So I nearly had a panic attack, but I did make it through as I looked through her slides and started thinking about what we're doing and all of the work we have to do from where we are now going forward. The primary points to me about where we are in Tennessee right now is that we've had a number of past experiments. We're really early, though, in this phase of looking at teacher compensation, teacher effectiveness broadly from the state level. And primarily, we have a number of policies in place, but really where we are is that we're heading into the next phase, which is taking the policy from policy to practice and really to implementation. And in this, we're learning primarily from districts in Tennessee, but also from districts around the country, and as well from states. But as you all know, a lot of this work that's taking place is really taking place mostly in districts at this point. And there are a number of districts in Tennessee that are further down the path than we are in thinking about this at the state level, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But our strategy overall is to look at differentiating teachers and leaders. For that, we're looking at a new teacher and leader evaluation system, then providing support, and in there, we're looking at a variety of different professional developments, but I think our plan, probably like most of y'all, is to really, again, try and differentiate and then provide individualized support through professional development, job-embedded professional development where possible. Again, this is a place where we're really learning from what districts are doing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, as I said. And then finally, so differentiate, support, and then reward. And so in the rewards category, we're looking at a couple of different strategies that I'll go through in a few. So on to my next slide. We, as you all know, in Tennessee, experimented in the 1980s and 90s with the Career Ladder program, and that was really our first foray into differentiated pay. Career Ladder was between $1,000 and $3,000 ongoing pay, ongoing bumps in pay for teachers, and it didn't necessarily have as much professional development associated with it. Some of the professional development was embedded in the work of teachers being evaluated. We've learned some from that, and we're going forward in different ways. We haven't updated our, we are currently in the process of updating our evaluation system, and I'll talk about that, and then actually we'll talk a lot more deeply about it in the Race to the Top presentation after this. But we had not done that since 2004. Again, as I said, we really are learning from districts, and Chattanooga began in 2003 working on a project called the Benwood Initiative, where they were really, where they were doing work with differentiated pay, awards of something like $5,000 for teachers, $10,000 for leaders, and then school-wide bonuses associated with value-added levels. That was one of the first initiatives in Tennessee. Later, as we learned a little bit more from that, the state put into place a requirement that districts submit to the state differentiated pay plans. That went into effect in 2007. Districts did actually submit differentiated pay plans, but because we didn't necessarily have the funding associated with it at the time, many districts have not actually implemented those plans. So we do have plans on the books. There are people that are thinking about this work, but again, as I said, we're sort of more in a place where we have the policy in place, and we're trying to get to more of having practice. In Knoxville, we do have 4 TAP schools. The TAP program will be expanding in Knoxville through Race to the Top work, also if they get a TIF grant. When we've learned a number of things from TAP, again, about how to do evaluation, about how to do annual evaluation, about how to bring school-level value-added, school-level rewards in with individualized rewards, and trying to marry some of those. We're also learning from the work that's being done in Memphis. Memphis has gotten a grant from the Gates Foundation as part of the Measures of Effective Teaching project. And the Teacher Effectiveness Initiative there is going to be piloting 3 different types of frameworks for evaluation and for observation. They are looking at a very comprehensive strategy of differentiating professional development, of increased individualized support for educators. Nashville is doing a similar thing. Nashville has just started on a project called Asset, where they're looking at preparation, recruitment, hiring and support, development, evaluation, and retention and rewards. That work will be supported in part through some of the Race to the Top work, in part through the potential of TIF money, in part through Title I. But really, in Metro Nashville, they're trying to find a way, as Jeanne was talking about, to really start to fund this in a comprehensive manner that's not just about these different federal funding streams, but also looking at how you start to look at the overall district structure for pay. So Tabitha talked about how the work that we've done with the NJA Policy Academy, which was really beneficial to the state in terms of being able to bring together a group of people, including the Association for School Superintendents in the state, the Teachers Union, and a variety of others to really start to think comprehensively about what are the things that we have in place and what are the policies that we need to have in place. And that got us really thinking about teacher evaluation and school leader evaluation, and helped lead to the work that was done in the First to the Top Act, which was passed in January. So this is the biggest reform we've done related to educator effectiveness in the last number of years. And I'm sure you all have heard some about it, but really the point of putting into place a comprehensive annual evaluation using multiple measures, again, is to try and differentiate between different types of teachers and leaders, look at the type of support that people need, and provide individualized support. So are we there yet? Definitely not. But that's really the goal of where we're trying to get to, and I think probably, as I've said, the goal of where everyone is looking to be. Within that annual evaluation, and again, if you all are interested in this particular topic, we'll get a lot deeper into it in the breakout sessions after this. But for the state of Tennessee, similar to Louisiana, what we have in place is now a law that provides for annual evaluation, 50% of which is in the qualitative category, observations, surveys, those types of measures, 50% in the quantitative category. So for us, 35% of that is value added where available, and where value added is not available, looking to develop other measures of growth. As you all probably have experienced, if you've done this in a district where you're looking at how you measure growth from one point to the next, and you either do or don't have some sort of system that can measure value added, this is an incredibly complex thing. And it is one that is not only difficult from the perspective of how you actually measure these things, but from how you gather people together to help you figure it out, and how you communicate to people that this is what you're trying to do. It's an incredibly difficult procedure, and one that we're steeped in the middle of, and really trying to learn about and learn from other states. Delaware has brought groups of educators together in a really great way to talk about this. We're doing some work similar to them. We'll be convening groups of educators in non-tested subjects in the coming months to talk about helping the state to figure out what does it actually look like to measure those things. It's one of the more complex areas of this conversation. And then so that's 35% of the evaluation, 15% of other student achievement measures that will be defined by a teacher evaluation advisory committee that's also helping the state to think about how you put all of these things together, what other measures of growth might look like, how you start to think about rolling it out to teachers, what are the things that are needed. So similar to the group in Louisiana, we have had since March a group of 9 educators, school board members of the business community, legislators thinking about how we do this comprehensively in the state of Tennessee, how we develop an annual evaluation that is fair, that supports teachers, and that's looking to help us get down the road of eventually thinking about compensation as well. As well, in the First to the Top Act, we passed legislation that would allow for alternative salary schedules to be proposed by districts. This is sort of building on the idea of differentiated pay plans, but really looking at if you're going to do this work and you're going to do it comprehensively and sustainably, then you have to think about the potential of reworking some of the salary schedule in order to do that. Within the First to the Top work, and I want to agree with Jeanne that whether or not you have Race to the Top funds in your state and in your districts, this is something that you have to figure out how to do sustainably, and something that we've wanted to focus on. So we do have a couple of different pools of money within the Race to the Top work to be looking at and providing districts the opportunity to either think about or actually put into place compensation systems. One is a fund that provides $12 million to do that. Essentially, it's sort of a mini TIF type fund. And really, as I've said, we're not necessarily at a place yet where, like Louisiana, we have a comprehensive plan for how we might think about compensation. In part, we're, again, learning from districts. We will, when we put this an RFP together for this work, I think we'll use some of the work that's been done in districts in the state. We also did apply as a state in a state-led application for a teacher incentive fund grant using 14 districts, 105 schools, and again, looking at differentiated pay, revised salary schedules across the different districts, and we'll use that to help us think about what a comprehensive system might look like, but really to plan over the next year for how you start to look at salary schedules, maybe make some changes there, use an evaluation system, and again, get to supported differentiated professional development. The last little piece that I talk about is that we have a number of large districts that I've talked about in the state that are looking at this work and that have moved fairly far down the line and have some sophisticated thinking on how they might do it, and we're learning from them. But there are also a group of small districts in the state that are trying to figure out how you start to work on compensation as well, and it's a little more complicated in those types of structures, and also because the supports aren't necessarily there at the district level the way they might be in a larger district to think about this. So from the state perspective, we're trying to get to a point where we can provide those types of services to those smaller districts that are trying to think about this but might have a Title I coordinator who's also the instructional coordinator for the district, who's also the band coordinator for the district, and all of those various things. And so we put together, as part of our Race to the Top application, a supplemental fund for those districts to start looking at this, and we're trying to engage national leaders who can help those districts really start to think about it more comprehensively. So again, really where we are is that we're learning from what's happening in districts. We're trying to get to a more comprehensive plan at the state level, and we're lucky to have some resources from which to think about that. But in order to make this work long term, we have to think about how we do it with existing resources and reallocation.
Good afternoon. My name is Shayne Spalten, and as Tabitha mentioned, I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer at the Denver Public Schools. And I think Erin set me up incredibly well as the sole district voice on this panel talking about state perspectives in the learnings that she's talked about that are happening between state policymakers and districts. I want to talk about a very similar mutually reinforcing process in Colorado by which districts like DPS, like Eagle County, which we heard from earlier, are engaging in a dialogue and helping to inform state policy, and in turn, state policy is helping to force improvements and refinements of the systems that we have in districts. In order to do that, I'm going to start with a little bit of history on ProComp, which is our pay-for-performance system for teachers, celebrating its 5th year anniversary this year. From that quick discussion on ProComp and its essential elements, I want to move to a discussion of how the work that we've done around teacher effectiveness, around pay for performance, has helped to inform the dialogue that's happening at the state level, and the ways in which that dialogue is pushing our systems within DPS to improve in terms of its ability to deliver different outcomes for kids. So just very quickly, next slide. So very quickly, ProComp started with one essential policy premise, and that was that districts like DPS should be aligning teacher compensation, the single largest expenditure within our budget, with the organization's most valued outcomes. Improved learning outcomes for kids. That's the premise we started with. It's the premise that we remain dedicated to as we continue to think about how ProComp has to be refined as we move forward. That being said, there were a number of goals that we were trying to accomplish with ProComp and continue to attempt to accomplish. First was the one I just mentioned: better alignment of financial incentives with improved student learning. The second was to create structures that would better attract new teachers and reduce turnover of early to mid-career teachers, where we saw that our rates of turnover were dramatically higher. The third was to increase our ability to attract teachers to serve in our highest poverty schools and in our hardest to staff positions, those positions in which we had traditionally seen very low applicant pools. And finally, there was a very explicit goal around creating positive and collaborative school cultures aligned around common goals for student learning. You're going to want to skip 2. The history of collaboration on ProComp actually goes further back than the 5 years. to 10 years ago, when we started discussions with our Teachers Association, the Denver Classroom Teachers Association, around pay for performance. And in August of 1999, initiated a pay for performance pilot by which teachers were setting specific goals for student outcomes. From October of 2001 to January of 2004, we had a task force on teacher compensation that was working on the development, based on the learnings from that pay for performance pilot, working on the development of what was finally delivered in March of 2004 as ProComp. You'll see we did a tremendous amount of communication with teachers. Teachers ultimately ratified the ProComp agreement at a rate of 59% to 40%. In November of 2005, we secured a dedicated revenue stream for our pay for performance, a $25 million a year mill levy, adjusted every year for inflation, which has been an important component, to fund ProComp moving forward. This was a dedicated revenue stream dedicated specifically to performance pay for teachers. Since then, we have done a number of things in order to create greater alignment around this compensation system within our program. In 2005, we instituted a pay-for-performance system for our principals around similar goals as well, with the idea that we would have teachers and principals aligned around the same goals for student achievement in their building. And in August 2008, we concluded a renegotiation of the ProComp agreement, which significantly increased the amount of incentives that we were tying to student achievement. So we saw those incentives go up by over 7 times, and more than doubled the amount of money that we were dedicating to teachers that were serving in hard-to-serve schools and hard-to-staff positions. The kind of collaboration that we have had with our teachers union around ProComp has led to extensive collaboration around our entire human capital agenda. We'll talk about some of the major projects that we have going on that are directly aligned to this work, but draw significantly from the kind of experience that we had with ProComp, the ability to have effective discussions around teacher effectiveness, and have built upon those structures in order to drive some of our other teacher effectiveness work forward. So real quickly, ProComp at a glance. So next slide. At this point, currently 70% of teachers currently participate in ProComp. So all of our new teachers enter into the ProComp system. Any teachers who were in place prior to 2006 when the program was initially implemented had the option to opt into our program. So we have over 70% of our teachers right now who are currently participating in ProComp. Once they participate in ProComp, their salary moves entirely within that structure. And there are incentives that are based in 3 primary areas. First, serving in hard-to-serve schools and hard-to-staff positions. Second, driving individual and school-level student growth. And third, expanding their knowledge and skills and demonstrating those knowledge and skills as part of their evaluation process. There are over $16,000 in salary increases that are available to teachers under ProComp, and the average teacher now earns approximately $6,500 in incentives every year. Next slide, please. Some of our initial learnings. And I think that these learnings are important in terms of how they've started to drive the state dialogue. First, since the implementation of ProComp, as part of a broader human capital agenda, and as Jason Glass said earlier, it's important to consider these compensation reforms as part of a broad human capital agenda. But we have seen substantial increases in student growth over the last several years. We have also seen higher performance of new teachers entering into the system. And to piggyback on Jason Cameron's thoughts on the effectiveness of compensation systems in driving recruitment and retention versus improvements in instructional practices, we've actually seen what Jason hypothesized, which is that the greatest impacts have been on recruitment and retention of new teachers, that there are more mixed results with regard to the ability of the system, as it's currently developed, to drive improvements in instructional practice. Some of the other important learnings that we've had over the last several years are the ways in which attitudes of teachers have changed towards performance-based pay. Can we switch slides? So as part of an initial evaluation that we've done at ProComp, we measured teacher attitudes towards performance-based pay, and the results were really striking. So I've pulled out a couple examples here, but for example, we had 3 out of 4 teachers who believed that ProComp was better designed to motivate teachers to improve performance than the traditional salary schedule. 2 out of 3 of our teachers believed that ProComp was better designed to ultimately improve student achievement than the traditional salary schedule. And even when you looked at non-ProComp teachers, so teachers who had intentionally opted out of the ProComp system, the results were about split as to which was more effective, the traditional schedule or the ProComp schedule. Finally, principals conveyed very strong beliefs about the ability of ProComp to attract and retain effective educators, to motivate changes in instructional practice, and to drive improved student achievement. So as we reflected on where we are as a district after the initial implementation of ProComp, we saw that there were some things that ProComp was doing very effectively, specifically about the recruitment and retention of highly effective teachers. What we didn't see was the ability of the system to drive improvements in instructional practice at the level that we would desire within the system. And part of the problem was, I think what Jason mentioned earlier, ProComp didn't provide a very clear picture of what we were looking for in effective teaching. It included measures around student learning that we expected of teachers, but those measures actually drove teachers to another question, which is, what do I need to do to improve and produce those kinds of results in student learning? So as we started to have a dialogue around what those gaps in the system were and how we improve and how we develop better measures for effective teaching that basically would substitute for measures which were at the beginning of the development of ProComp proxies for effective teaching, we started to move to the development of effective evaluation systems. Next slide, please. So in the spring of 2010, the state moved forward with an educator effectiveness statute that called for new systems of teacher and principal evaluation based at least 50% on student outcomes. The state of Colorado conceived these teacher evaluations as part of broader human capital initiatives and called for greater linkages between these measures of educator effectiveness and all kinds of systems of human capital reform, including hiring, compensation, professional development, the granting or conferral of non-probationary status, and dismissal. Next slide, please. Again, DPS and other districts within the state have been intensely engaged in the discussion that's going on around these systems. DPS had already started on the work around teacher effectiveness with a goal to roll out a new teacher evaluation system to a select number of schools starting in January of this year and full rollout next year, as well as a new principal system that would be piloted next year with full rollout the following year. The system of evaluation, like ProComp, would be a multiple measure system to be based on student outcomes, principal and peer observations, school-wide contributions, and student perceptions. And we have drawn extensively, once again, from teachers and principals in this process, so have engaged in a focus group effort involving over 250 teachers and principals to talk about their goals for this system. We have several design teams composed of members of teacher groups and principal groups that are engaged in this work, helping to design what this new system looks like going forward. In turn, a lot of that work is being transferred to the state level. At the state level, we do have a governor's council that's working on similar type issues, working on developing measures for effective teaching. We've been able to take this work with our teachers and principals and bring it through our representatives to the governor's council as well to help inform that dialogue. And I think that's the really essential component of this. We are in constant contact with our state policymakers around this. There is an incredible depth of understanding and learning to come from districts that are implementing these types of systems and remain very committed to using whatever learnings we have and learning from other districts throughout the state in order to inform that state dialogue.
Thank you, ladies, for a very interesting introduction to what each of these two states and districts have done. I think what's interesting in Louisiana and Tennessee's case is that there was innovation at the district level, and the state policy essentially caught up with what districts were doing or provided a policy infrastructure excuse me, for more districts to innovate in this area. And then in the case of Denver and other districts in Colorado where the district work was well underway, there is now some interest at the state level at doing what Tennessee and Louisiana and the other states in the Policy Academy that we've supported at the Governors Association. There's some interest in bringing some of that work to scale at the state, and then also some real momentum behind creating a policy infrastructure to support that in the state of Colorado as well. Do we have any questions? Well, yes, sir. There you go.
I'm Leonard Bradley. I teach at Peabody, and I'm wondering, as I listen to Erin O'Hara, I have the impression you've done a very good job of coordinating the K-12 policy development between the Governor's Policy Office, the State Board of Education, the State Department, and perhaps TEA, the Education Association. And I'm wondering if it's as complicated as implementation through 135 local school systems is going to be. I'm wondering if that is going to be a very difficult problem. They've got to follow state policy, but implementing in 135 separate districts seemed extraordinarily difficult to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I don't know if mine's on.
I think it is.
Can you all? Okay, great. It's actually one of the bigger issues that you deal with, I think, at the state level, looking at how, and we've talked a lot about this with our Teacher Evaluation Advisory Committee. We obviously talk a lot about this sort of in general at the state level. How do you allow for innovation at the district level, especially in those districts, as I said, that are more advanced, but how do you also then support those districts where they might not have the infrastructure, the ability to do as many and different types of things? And then as well, when you start looking at an evaluation system and then also a compensation system statewide, how do you think about fidelity from one district to the next? How do you think about monitoring how well districts are actually employing the different systems? We don't do a great job of that right now. I think we'll struggle through it in the next couple of years, but it's a very important issue and one that's difficult to figure out, just how much pressure you put on it from the state perspective of defining what a policy might look like and how much you let districts really do what the district wants to do. I'd imagine most states and districts struggle with this in the same sense that I think probably districts and schools struggle in the same way, and that the federal government struggles with the states as to how much to incentivize versus to mandate. And so we will struggle with that, but are hoping to put in place a couple of different things to start to deal with it. One of the most interesting is that we're working with the Education Delivery Institute to think about a concept called deliverology, which is a hard word to say, but a great concept where you really look at the chain from the top, sort of the state level, all the way down to the teacher in the classroom. And when things don't quite go right, try and figure out what point in the chain are you having a breakdown, and then how do you start to correct that. And so an interesting concept that hopefully will help us to try and get at some of the problem there.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you. Cynthia Osborne from University of Texas at Austin. So I don't know if, there we go. My question is specifically for Dr. Burns, but others may have input. Texas, like Louisiana, has now passed legislation in which we have to hold our educator prep programs somewhat accountable for the teachers that they're producing, at least understand the quality that's happening. So I have two questions. One, have you had any feedback from the educator prep programs in terms of changing what they're doing and preparing teachers? Has there been a loop between what you're learning and what's occurring? And then more generally, I don't really hear our educator prep programs involved in these conversations about helping us set the common understanding of what it is all teachers should know or what all principals should know, especially for our new teachers coming in. Wondering if they're involved in your advisory committees and so forth, and what role they're really playing, because I'm not hearing that in our discussions enough today.
Within Louisiana, our teacher preparation programs have been very much involved. I had mentioned that our state raised its expectations for state certification, not only what teachers needed to know and be able to do, but also with praxis cutoff scores, they were all raised. And so all of our universities had to go through a process of redesigning all of their teacher preparation programs so that they were aligned with our state content standards for K through 12. They were all aligned with their state teacher standards. And all of our universities, public and private, must be nationally accredited. So they also had to address national standards for either NCAID or for TEAC. So first off, all of our universities had to redesign, create very different types of programs. We also had more alternate certification pathways than existed previously. So that all came from policy from our Department of Education. Then after they were redesigned, we brought in national consultants to evaluate the programs, and they were not approved by the Board of Regents or the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education until they addressed all the stipulations of the national consultants. Then we started the process of what we did with the development of our value-added model. And our College of Education deans were involved from the very beginning with getting the results from the pilot, providing feedback, asking questions. We did some additional analysis in order to address some of their questions. And so they've been involved throughout this entire process of developing and understanding. Then in addition to that, we have had sub-grants that we awarded to our universities, first through a grant with Carnegie. We also have some state funds, and we'll have the grants this next year, where all of our universities are able to identify a researcher who participates on a state research team. And through that process, they're actually looking at their value-added data as well as the other data that they have that they've collected for NCAID or for TEAC. And they're actually going to be doing some action research to identify strategies to address areas in which they have weaknesses or relative weaknesses. We're finding that even our universities that are at our top 2 levels in our performance levels, where their new teachers are coming out comparable or greater, the growth of learning is greater than that of experienced teachers, they're still wanting to go in and improve programs where they have relative weaknesses. So all of this is very directly linked to what's happening in our schools. And throughout the whole redesign, we had redesign teams that had district personnel, arts and science faculty, College of Ed faculty, all involved in the redesign process. So we've moved in our state away from universities being totally responsible for preparing teachers in isolation, as compared to this now is a responsibility of districts and universities working together to prepare the kind of teachers that can have growth in student learning. And I'll just add that with our Blue Ribbon Commission, a third of that is made up of higher education. So they very definitely have a voice. And our Department of Education within our state has been wonderful about now involving our College of Education deans on committees where higher ed is involved on various commissions, advisory committees within our state. We've realized in our state that you can't prepare new teachers without them going into schools where there are effective teachers and effective principals who can mentor the new teachers who are being prepared. So it has to be a collaborative relationship between the two.
Thanks a lot.
Jeanne, I just wondered if you could just mention briefly about how this process in Louisiana has driven improvements across universities, not just in the School of Ed.
Oh, it definitely has brought about changes in our colleges of arts and sciences. When our state went through the process of redesigning their programs and looking at their data, in a number of cases where changes needed to occur was in increase of expectations within colleges of arts and sciences pertaining to the content knowledge that teachers needed to have in order to teach to our state's K through 12 content standards. So within our state, this has really driven faculty, both in arts and sciences and education, to take a look at what is specifically happening within content areas. Just as a last point, what we have found in looking at our value-added results for our teacher preparation programs, that we see as much variance within universities as we see across universities in the preparation of new teachers in specific content areas. As an example, some of our programs that are doing very, very well are at a level 1 and 2, which is growth is greater than experienced teachers or comparable, and then they'll have one content area where they're at a level 3, which is comparable to other new teachers in a specific content area. And then we can now actually drill down into the specific content areas, such as we've got one university that is at a level 4, where the overall growth of learning is less than that of new teachers. But when they go and drill down into their results, it's only in language arts, and it's in their grades 1 through 5 program. They're doing a fine job as far as preparing teachers for grades 6 through 12 and for middle school. But it is their grades 1 through 5 program that they're now going in to try to determine why are the new teachers who are coming out of their programs, and it's not just in one district, I want to point this out. It is across different school districts. So it's not the district, it's not the school. It appears that there is something that is happening in the preparation of teachers in language arts in grades 1 through 5 for that particular teacher preparation program.
And I think that's actually a really good example of where state policy can help support the work that's happening in districts. We do some of this work with our university partners as well as our alternative route providers. So we do have programs with TFA with the New Teacher Project, as well as a brand new residency program, which I think has been incredibly important in terms of helping to define expectations with our university partners around kind of clinical components for students. But the challenge that we often ran into as a district was that the statistical pool that we were drawing from in terms of how well were these teachers performing in classrooms often wasn't big enough for us to create the kind of distinctions that Jeanne's talking about that you have once you can look across the state at how teachers are performing. And so Colorado actually, with that feedback around what some of our challenges were, is looking at implementing a much broader statewide system of measuring effectiveness of routes across the state as well. So I think
I'd like to add that we do not look just at universities. We look at universities, we look at private providers, and we now have a new change a policy going through where for any out-of-state university that offers field-based experiences within our state for teacher preparation or for educational leadership, they are also going to fall under our accountability system for with value added and for teacher preparation and educational leadership preparation. So this is not just the universities, but it's any private entity that is state approved, and it will be for any out-of-state university that has state approval to be able to operate within our state online or actually teaching classes within our state.
Thank you. Shayne, I was glad that you pointed that out, because one of the questions I was going to ask you if we had time was what were some of the state policies that could better support what you're trying to do. So thank you so much for pointing that out. Yes, ma'am.
Cheryl Wilson, I'm the superintendent of the great big school district of Socorro, New Mexico. That's a school district of 2,000 that is larger than 2/3 of the school district in my state. And I put that in a context to begin the question again to Erin O'Hara and to all of you about state policy and federal policy vis-a-vis the differences in what we have. I have been active at the state level and have been in larger school districts. In fact, I was in Jefferson County, Colorado before I went to where I currently am. And I moved where I did on purpose. I know every single teacher in my school district. I'm in every single classroom in my school district every month, and I'm the superintendent. Not the reality that you have in those larger school districts. But by the same token, I have colleagues that when a bus driver is sick, drive the bus. And so the conversation about establishing these policies where at the state and federal level we're making decisions about salaries for teachers. For 2 years running, I have 2 open special education positions. I fill them during the course of the summer, and then as soon as something opens up in Albuquerque or Las Cruces, I lose them. And I'm not able to keep people. And so I think at the state level, just want some conversation from you that have the experience with this already. How do you make sure that as you incentivize, that you do incentives that have some application across the state so that we don't create a different achievement gap than the one that we currently have?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to Professor Bradley's question as well, which is how do you allow innovation but not, and what do you do at the state level? And it's a great point. We hear from educators in Tipton County, which is right outside of Memphis, that they're trying to put some things in place, but Memphis pays better, and so it's hard to keep your best people there when they can go right across the way, and so it's a difficult problem. And so part of it, I think, really is about trying to put together a framework at the state level, and then allow for districts to do the kind of work that they need to do, and to allow for some things. Like I said, we tried to think about that a little bit in terms of provide a large pool of funds that's available to anyone, but also then provide a smaller pool of funds that's available just to those smaller districts to think about things that pertain just to them. And we have in the state an association of independent and municipal school systems that, and I think actually this is on the agenda for later, but that is doing some work on their own and trying to band together as a group of districts as well to apply for different funding pools to do things like that. But it's a real issue that we have to be aware of and that we're always thinking about. So I appreciate the point.
There are places where districts have worked together. Minnesota is a good example in their QComp program, where small districts have worked together to develop plans that the state of Minnesota approves for participation in their compensation program. So that might be a good place for you to look at how you can build bridges between small districts to pool your resources. And it also,
sorry, I just thought of one other thing that I wanted to add. I mean, one of the things I think is interesting that I don't know that we know a lot about at this point, and I hope either from the work that we'll do through our Race to the Top grants with a number of districts actually, 30-some districts at least put differentiated pay or performance-based pay into their Race to the Top plans, big districts, small districts, et cetera. So we'll have the ability to learn a little bit, I think, from how how this works in smaller districts, because there's not a whole lot out there in the research pool on it. And so I hope that we'll be able to provide people some data on that as well. If we end up getting a TIF grant, the majority of our districts within our state-led TIF grant actually are smaller districts, are municipal districts, or are completely rural county districts. And so again, what are the amounts of money that make sense in those types of places? How might you look at it differently? How does it pertain to what's going on around? Hopefully we'll be able to provide some research basis for that, and actually working with the National Center on Performance Incentives for that work. So.
I will just add one thing, and I don't have the answer, but I know that this was an issue that our Blue Ribbon Commission, the members discussed to great extent, because of the fact that we have different districts that have different pay salaries currently, and if there are incentives within those districts and in those schools, then they're going to be rating best teachers from surrounding school districts to come to those particular districts. But where the discussion went with our commission members was on the whole issue dealing with providing support to have high quality principals and educational leaders within schools so that there wouldn't be the issue of teachers leaving because of the fact that they could go to another district and all. So we got into a fairly extensive discussion pertaining to what districts needed to do in order to help to ensure that they had high quality principals, high quality leaders within the schools so that they wouldn't lose teachers. But that was a major issue that was discussed.
Well, this wraps up our time for this panel, and I hope that you've learned a lot. We're about to get some instructions about what we're doing next, but please join me in thanking these ladies for their time and information.